I still remember that day every time the sky goes dark at the wrong hour. Every time the weather turns strange. Every time I hear the opening riff of a Metallica song in some grocery store or passing car. I go right back to that winter afternoon in our little town, the only time I ever saw snow here, and the only time I ever worked a homicide under an eclipse. My name is David Collins. I served as a detective in a small county in the Midwestern United States for more than 3 decades. I thought I had seen just about everything people could do to each other. I was wrong. This is the case I still dream about, the one everyone in town remembers simply as the Metallica Murder. It started with the weather. Where I live, we get cold. We get wind that cuts through your coat. But snow, real snow, the kind that sticks to the ground and softens the noise of the world, that almost never happens. That winter, the forecasters on the local radio station would not stop talking about a strange front moving down from the north. Arctic air, they called it. Record lows. A chance of snowfall even in our county. People joked about it at first. We are not a ski town. We are a feed store, a couple of diners, a bar, a high school, and a few churches kind of town. Snow belonged to Christmas movies, not to our cracked sidewalks and empty lots. But there was something else on the news too. A solar eclipse. A big one. Not total in our area, but close. Close enough that the sky would darken in the middle of the afternoon. Close enough that they made those cardboard glasses with the black lenses and passed them out at the high school. The whole week leading up to it, people talked about nothing else. The teachers planned to take the kids outside. The old-timers at the diner argued about whether eclipses were bad luck. Teenagers planned photos for social media. It felt festive in a strange way, like the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for a magic trick in the sky. Then the owner of the Rusty Nail, our one and only rock bar, had an idea. He put up a flyer that read in big red letters, Eclipse Night, Metallica Tribute Live Band. He hired a local cover band from the next county over, for guys pushing 40 who played every other weekend in bowling alleys and biker bars. They knew every Metallica hit by heart. No lyrics on stands. No hesitation. He timed the show so that the heaviest songs would hit right as the sky went dark. Rock and cosmic spectacle, all at once. That was the plan. The morning of the eclipse, I woke up before my alarm. The house was quiet. My wife had already gone in for the early shift at the hospital. I remember standing by the kitchen window with a cup of coffee, watching my breath fog the glass. Something felt off. The air had that particular bite, that dry, brittle cold you get up north. Not here, not usually. By mid-morning, the first flakes started to fall. Just a dusting at first. People came out of the hardware store smiling, faces turned up to the sky. Kids laughed on the sidewalks, sticking their tongues out, trying to catch the flakes. I got called into the station anyway. Bad weather brings trouble. It always has and it always will. We had a couple of minor car accidents, a shoplifting call, nothing major. The sheriff joked that God was giving us a snow globe for the eclipse. Around noon, the sky started to change. The light got strange. It was still bright, but flatter, grayer, like someone had turned the contrast down on the world. Inside the department, we had the television on low. Scientists on the national network explained the path of the shadow over the country. There were maps, graphs, excited hosts. Out in the lobby, a group of teenagers from the high school walked past the station windows, cardboard glasses in hand, heading toward the football field. They were smiling, pushing each other, humming Metallica riffs because everyone in town knew about the tribute show that night. One of those kids was a girl named Emily Hayes. Emily was not the victim, but she is how I remember that day, her and one other person. She stopped by the front door and waved at me through the glass. I had known her since she was in middle school. Her mother worked at the diner. Her father drove a truck. Emily had been all elbows and braces a few years before. On that day, she was almost grown. Dark hair tucked into a knit cap, gloves with little skulls on them, a Metallica hoodie she had begged her mother for when the band played in the nearest city. I walked out and teased her. "Skipping school, Em?" She grinned and told me, "School's outside today, Detective Collins. Eclipse lesson. We are being scientifically supervised." She wiggled the eclipse glasses at me. Behind her, a figure lingered near the back of the group. A woman in her late 20s, long light brown hair, thick scarf around her neck, hands in her coat pockets. She was watching the kids and watching Emily. That was the victim. Her name was Rachel Miller. Rachel had moved back to town after college. She had tried living in the city, done the internships, shared apartments with too many roommates and not enough heat. But when her father had a stroke, she came home. She took over part of the family hardware store, handling the accounts and the ordering. She taught piano lessons on the side. She volunteered on weekends at the animal shelter. Everybody liked her. Not in that shallow, small-town gossip way. People truly liked her. She was patient. She listened when older folks talked. She remembered birthdays. She played piano at the Christmas service at the smaller church, the one that always struggled to keep the lights on. She had been a Metallica fan since she was a teenager. Not the type with posters covering the walls or tattoos on her arms. She was the type who listened with headphones late at night, the type who got through hard times by focusing on powerful music and loud guitars. It was Rachel who had convinced the owner of the Rusty Nail to do the Eclipse show. I learned that later. That afternoon, though, she was just a face in the cold, standing behind those kids, watching the sky. She nodded at me, polite, when our eyes met. "Hey, detective." I said, "Afternoon, Rachel. You coming by the station for a snowball fight later?" She smiled and told me she would only come if I promised not to arrest her for assault. We laughed. It was that kind of day, light and odd, full of a sense that something strange and special was happening. I had no idea that by midnight I would be standing over her body in the snow behind a bar. The eclipse hit in the early afternoon. I stepped outside with a pair of cardboard glasses someone had left on my desk. The air had gotten colder. The sky darker. There were people on every sidewalk. Some huddled in coats, others in heavy flannel shirts. They tilted their heads back as the sun turned into a shrinking crescent, then a thin sliver, then almost nothing. It did not get completely dark, but it was wrong enough. Streetlights flickered on. Dogs started barking in backyards. The world held its breath. For a few minutes, everything felt suspended. Cars slowed. Voices hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the shadow moved on. The light returned a little at a time. People clapped. You could hear cheers from the high school field. Inside the station, the phone stayed quiet. It was the calm before the storm. I have learned to recognize it. I just did not know yet what shape that storm would take. The show at the Rusty Nail was scheduled to start in the early evening. By that time, the snow had stopped, but the air was bitter cold. The streets were slick. A thin, uneven blanket of white covered the sidewalks, lit by the orange glow of the parking lot lights. You could hear the sound from the bar from halfway down the block, amplifiers humming, guitars being tuned, voices shouting over the clatter of bottles. I was not at the bar. I was on patrol. The sheriff liked to have a detective out on the street on nights with big events, just in case. Around the time the band launched into their second or third song, I was a couple of miles away, dealing with a neighbor dispute over a snow shovel. I remember the call clearly because, while I was standing in the freezing air, trying to explain to two grown men that it did not matter who bought the shovel if both of them were using it to clear the shared driveway, someone's phone rang with a familiar riff. Metallica. The real band this time, not the tribute group. It made me think of the Rusty Nail, of Emily and those kids, of Rachel watching the sky. I wrapped up the shovel argument and got back in my car. The radio crackled to life. The dispatcher said, "Unit 3, we have a report from the Rusty Nail. Possible disturbance. Some kind of situation behind the bar." The voice on the other end sounded wrong, too tight and too formal. I turned the wheel and headed that way. By the time I pulled into the parking lot, the band inside was still playing. I could hear the drums pounding through the walls, the crowd singing along, loud and off-key. But near the back of the building, the mood was different. People stood in small clusters, coats pulled tight, breath steaming in the air. Someone was crying. The owner of the bar was pacing, running his hands through his hair, phone pressed to his ear. The local ambulance was already there. No lights. No rush. That was the first bad sign. I parked and walked around to the back. The snow back there was thinner, trampled by deliveries and the daily cigarette breaks of regulars. There was a narrow alley between the bar and the hardware store, a dumpster, and a metal door with a flimsy light hanging above it. In the weak glow of that light, Rachel Miller lay in the snow. She was on her side, facing away from the building. Her coat was open, her scarf pulled halfway off, her hair spread out like a halo gone wrong. Blood stained the snow beneath her head, dark and slowly spreading in the cold. Her eyes were half open and empty. I have seen my share of bodies. It never gets easy. It should not. But that one hurt. The paramedics from the hospital, people I knew by first name, stood a few feet away, their bags closed. There was nothing they could do. I crouched down beside her, careful not to disturb the ground more than necessary. The cold hit my knees through my pants. I put on gloves, habit, and procedure. A thin line of blood ran from behind her ear and down into her hair. There were no obvious stab wounds to the chest, no gunshot hole that I could see. I thought head trauma, blunt force. I looked at her hands. Her right hand was curled into a fist around something dark. I made a note to photograph it before anyone touched it. There were footprints around the body, some fresh, some older, some crisp, some already softened by other steps. The snow that had seemed so beautiful that morning now felt like a cruel joke. It recorded everything and then, with just a little time and pressure, blurred it all. By the time I stood up again, my breath felt heavy in my chest. The owner of the bar walked toward me, his voice shaking. He told me she had been there earlier, inside, helping set up the sound system. She had been fine. I asked him how long ago that was. He said he did not know, sometime before the eclipse, sometime before they started. She had been going back and forth, checking cables, talking to the band. I looked toward the back door and asked who had found her. A young man stepped forward, one of the kitchen staff. His eyes were red, and a cigarette trembled between his fingers. He said he had come out to smoke and almost tripped over her. I asked if the door had been locked. He shook his head and told me they never locked it during shows. People went in and out all the time to smoke or to get some air. Inside the bar, I could still hear the muffled sound of Metallica. The tribute band had no idea what was happening out back. The music and the crime existed in the same building, separated by one door and a few inches of insulation. Later, in the quiet of the interview room, I would piece together the timeline. But that night, all I had was a dead woman in the snow and a world of noise pressing in from the other side of the wall. We cleared the back area and secured the scene as best we could. We called the sheriff and the coroner. We let the band finish the set, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. We needed some order, and we needed to keep the crowd from spilling out into the crime scene. By the time the last note rang out and the amplifiers went silent, the parking lot was full of squad cars and worried faces. We moved people carefully, took names, and asked everyone to stay. It was a small town. They knew the drill. Inside, the air smelled like sweat, beer, and the faint metallic tang of spent adrenaline. The stage was still warm. Guitars leaned against their stands. The band members sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around cups of coffee they were not drinking. I sat down with them and asked them to walk me through the set, song by song, and to tell me when they had last seen Rachel. Their lead singer, a man named Tom, rubbed his eyes and said they had started with an easier song to warm up and then hit the heavier stuff when the eclipse was starting. People had loved it. They were taking videos, shouting. I asked for song titles. They went through them, one by one. As they talked, something clicked in the back of my mind. We did not have a clear time of death yet, but we did have something else. We had a soundtrack. Over the next few days, that soundtrack became our clock. We pulled security footage from the bar. We checked cameras from the hardware store next door. We even checked the county traffic camera a couple of blocks away, just in case. The eclipse had messed with the light levels. The sudden shift from day to almost dusk and back again had made some of the automatic adjustments on the cameras go haywire. The result was a patchwork of blurry images, overexposed here, too dark there, faces washed out or grainy. But we had audio. The bar's cameras captured not just pictures but sound. You could hear the band playing, the crowd shouting, glasses clinking. I brought in the set list the band had given me. I sat at my desk with a cheap pair of headphones, replaying the night from the beginning. First song. Second song. Third song. On the video, you could see Rachel moving around the bar in the earlier tracks, helping the sound guy, checking her phone, laughing with Emily, who had come in after the school eclipse viewing with a few friends. As the show went on, the room got more crowded. It was harder to track her. Then, somewhere around the middle of the set, she walked toward the back door. She paused and talked to someone near the bar. It was hard to tell who. The video was grainy. She pushed open the door and stepped out into the night. The timestamp put it right as the band was starting another Metallica classic, heavy guitars and a driving rhythm. From that moment on, Rachel did not appear on any more indoor cameras. We checked the back alley footage. The hardware store had a cheap camera pointed toward the dumpsters. Snow on the lens had made it mostly useless. Snowflakes close to the glass turned into big, bright blobs, washing out the background. But if you squinted, if you adjusted the brightness and contrast and sat very still, you could see shapes. Rachel stepping into the alley. Someone else already there. A blurred figure in a dark coat, hands in pockets. They moved toward each other, not hostile, not at first. Then the video glitched. The Eclipse had played tricks with the light sensors, and the camera had tried to compensate. When the image returned, Rachel was on the ground. The other figure was leaning over her. Then gone. It was not enough. Not yet. We turned to the witnesses. We interviewed everyone who had been at the bar, regulars, new faces, band members, staff. We heard the same things, over and over. Rachel had been in a good mood, excited about the show, talking about how weird and beautiful the Eclipse had been. She had argued with someone near the back of the bar at one point. A man. His name came up more than once. Ethan Hayes. Ethan was Emily's older brother. I had known him since he was a kid. He was the kind of boy who pulled the legs off grasshoppers and then cried about it. Smart and sensitive, maybe too sensitive. As a teenager, he drifted and fell in with a rougher crowd. Nothing too serious, a little drinking, a little weed, some vandalism. I had talked to him a few times, warned him, told him he was better than the path he was walking. He had straightened out, more or less. He got a job at a factory in the next town over and took night classes. He was at the show that night. Witnesses said he and Rachel had dated briefly. It had ended badly, with arguments about leaving town, about responsibility, about family. When I asked him about it at the station, he sat across from me with his jaw tight and his hands folded. He admitted they had argued that night, about old things, about wasted potential on both sides. He said she told him he was wasting his brain, and he told her she was hiding in this town. They both said things they did not mean. When I asked if he had followed her outside, he said no. When I asked if he had seen her leave, he hesitated and finally admitted that he had seen her go out the back, but claimed he stayed inside with his friends near the stage. He had a partial alibi. People remembered seeing him during the songs that lined up with the estimated time of death. But the Eclipse, the dark, the crowded room, everything was muddy and blurred. We needed something more solid. It came from a place I should have expected, a teenager with a smartphone. One of Emily's friends, a girl named Lauren, came into the station with her mother 3 days after the murder. She wore a sweatshirt too big for her and a look of guilt too big for her age. She sat down across from my desk and slid her phone toward me. She told me she had recorded some of the show, but her mother thought maybe I should see a specific part. I put on headphones and pressed play. The video was shaky, shot from somewhere near the middle of the crowd. You could see the band on stage, lights flashing, smoke from a cheap machine drifting through the air. The sound was distorted and too loud, the phone's tiny microphone overwhelmed by guitars and drums. But the important part was not the music. It was a small patch of glass near the edge of the frame, a window. While the band thrashed on stage and the crowd jumped up and down, shouting and pumping their fists, the phone caught a glimpse of movement outside that window. A shape. 2 shapes, actually. Rachel and someone else. The angle was bad. You never saw faces, just silhouettes. A figure stepping in close. An arm raised. Then, for a fraction of a second, the light from the back door swung open, casting a slice of brightness across the alley. Just enough to catch the edge of a face. It was not clear, not detailed, but it was enough. In that flash, I saw something familiar. The shape of the nose, the line of the jaw, the way the shoulders sloped. I replayed that short piece over and over. Then I called Ethan back in. We sat in the same interview room as before, the same table, the same recorder. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes and an unshaven face. I slid the phone across the table and asked him what he saw. He watched, and his hand started to shake. He tried to claim it was nothing, just shadows, that it could be anyone. I paused the video on that bright fraction of a second and pointed out the profile, the hair, the jacket everyone remembered him wearing that night, dark green with a tear on the left sleeve. I reminded him that he had told me he never went outside and had stayed near the stage after their argument. I told him he had lied. He put the phone down slowly, his eyes glassy. He admitted he had followed her out back because he wanted to really talk where it was quiet. They argued again. She told him he needed to move on, that whatever they had was over, that she did not want to be stuck with someone who hated this town but never left it. He said he lost it for a second. He yelled. She yelled back. He grabbed her arm. He closed his eyes when he told me she tried to pull away, slipped on the snow, and hit her head on the corner of the concrete step. He said the sound would haunt him for the rest of his life. He started to cry, not loud, just silent tears. He kept repeating that he did not mean to hurt her. When I asked why he did not call for help, he said he had panicked. He knelt down, saw blood, and felt like the music inside the bar was mocking him, the laughter and noise just on the other side of the wall. He told himself she was already gone, that there was nothing he could do. He convinced himself that if he called for help and told the truth, everyone would think he had meant to kill her. He admitted to going back inside, washing his hands, and trying to act normal. Later, when the kitchen worker found Rachel's body and the panic started, he slipped out the front door before the first patrol car arrived. It was not a carefully planned murder. It was a moment of anger, a deadly fall, and a terrible decision made in fear. But Rachel was just as dead, and the law does not call that nothing. The prosecutors charged Ethan with manslaughter and leaving the scene of an accident where he had caused serious injury. He pleaded guilty. He went to prison. His parents aged what felt like 10 years in the space of one. Emily stopped wearing band shirts for a long time. She stopped playing music altogether. Rachel's parents buried their only child on a cold day when the snow had turned to dirty slush piled along the sides of the road. The church was packed. People stood in the back, hats in their hands, eyes down. I sat near the rear and listened to the pastor talk about loss and forgiveness. I listened to Rachel's piano teacher, an older woman with trembling hands, talk about how Rachel used to stay late after lessons to help pack up sheet music. After the service, I stepped outside and lit a cigarette I did not need. I watched the steam rise from people's mouths as they talked in the parking lot. The sky was a flat, dull gray. There were no eclipses, no cosmic spectacle, just winter settling in around us. People in town stopped talking about the eclipse after a while. They stopped talking about the snow too. Weather comes and goes. Life moves on. But every time someone puts a Metallica song on the jukebox at the Rusty Nail now, the owner's eyes flick, just for a second, toward the back door. He had the concrete step replaced, not because it was broken but because he could not stand to look at it. Emily eventually started listening to music again. She left town a few years later, went to college, and became a social worker. I ran into her once when she came back to visit her parents. We stood outside the diner in the evening light, summer bugs humming in the weeds. She told me she still remembered that day, the eclipse, the snow, Rachel's laugh, and her brother's face when I took him away. She asked if I thought it would have been different if the sky had just stayed normal that day, if there had been no snow, no eclipse, no big show, just a regular weekday. I thought about it and told her I did not know. Maybe Rachel and Ethan would have argued another time, in another place. Maybe they would have made peace. Maybe her brother would have left town. Maybe he would have stayed. The eclipse did not make him grab her arm. The snow did not make her slip. But sometimes big moments bring out what is already there, the good and the bad. She nodded slowly and said that sometimes she heard one of those songs on the radio and had to pull over the car because she was right back there in that bar, in that moment before everything went wrong. I knew what she meant. For me, it is not the songs themselves. It is the combination. Dark sky in the middle of the day. Snow on warm sidewalks. A crowded bar humming with energy. Loud guitars shaking the walls. And outside, in the narrow strip of cold between buildings, two people who once loved each other making choices they can never take back. I have worked cases that were more complicated, cases that involved gangs, drugs, and careful planning. This one was simple in a way. A slip, a fall, and a decision to walk away instead of call for help. But it is the one that sits on my chest at night. Because of who Rachel was. Because of who Ethan could have been. Because of the way the universe seemed to line up its tricks that day. An eclipse that turned day to dusk. Snow that turned our ordinary town into something strange and soft and quiet. A Metallica tribute band playing their hearts out inside a bar while, a few feet away, a life ended in the cold. People like to talk about fate, about signs, about cosmic meaning. I am a detective. I deal in evidence, in cause and effect. Rachel died because a man lost his temper, grabbed her arm, and then chose fear over responsibility when things went bad. That is the truth. That is enough. But I will tell you this. On rare nights, when the radio is low and my house is quiet and my wife is asleep, I will hear a certain riff start up from some passing car outside, Metallica again, and just for a second, I feel that same wrong light on my skin, that eclipse glow. I see snowflakes drifting past the station window. I see Rachel's scarf caught on the wind. I smell cold air and cigarette smoke behind the Rusty Nail. And I remember that, on the day the sky went dark in the middle of the afternoon, the worst thing that happened was not in the heavens. It was right there on the ground, between two people who could not find a way to step back before everything slipped away. That is the part the weather cannot be blamed for. That is the part that belongs to us.